Though the Bible is not considered a valid source, it is more of a valid source than the Sumerian tablets or records for obvious reasons. Cush begot Nimrod, and Nimrod founded Babylon, placing black people in the ancient world in the Middle East, right by Gobekli Tepe. It is not in northern Turkey, or far west Turkey. It is in southeastern Turkey, right above Syria. And of course, these nation lines weren't always drawn the way they are. So when you follow biblical accounts, which are perhaps, and the Torah, which are perhaps the only accounts we really have to go on, and you have to ask yourself, well, why would they lie? Why would a Semitic people give a black African people from East Africa, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, parts of Sudan, the bottom part, the credit for what they've done if it was Semitic people keeping the records? And for those of you who think this is some kind of white conspiracy, and it was white people, why would white people give black people the credit for Babylon? No, the evidence does seem to suggest that there were black Africans in the Middle East long ago. However, it is inconclusive. One thing's for sure, we cannot jump to the conclusion that whites or even Semites, were responsible. Even the Hittites themselves came thousands of years after, the Hittite Empire, which coincidentally bordered with the Egyptian Empire, which included Syria. Going back to, I think it's about 600 BC or so, something like that. I'll put in the notes. So who built Gobekli Tepe and why? Is it really an archaeological site? More often than not, I do not see it referred to as such, only from invalid sources. But I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And even in the Smithsonian that published the article about Schmidt and the German archaeological team, they made it clear that it would have attracted hunter-gatherers from Africa, which also seems to substantiate what the Bible says about Cush founding Nimrod, bringing about Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Remember, the site was built by hunter-gatherers before the age of agriculture, and Cush was a mighty hunter and a mighty warrior, according to Genesis 10. This video is about Gobekli Tepe and its significance in the ancient world. It seems that Gobekli Tepe predates Napta Playa. But for us to trace religion, we'd have to truly trace it from the start. Several things stick out to me about the Smithsonian's 2008 article. One is that the guy claims, well after it came out in about 2006 or before, about the Python head, that it is the world's oldest religious site. And he's a German, associated with, I think, the German Archaeological Institute, whatever it's called, I'll put it in the comments. That is alarming to me, because why would they make such a claim if they don't have an agenda? And if they have an agenda, then it kind of casts doubt on their discovery's authenticity. But nevertheless, I'm going to make this video as if it is an actual discovery and it's all on the up and up. So first we have to look at Botswana, where the python head was discovered. The spearheads around it were dated to 70,000 years ago. Obviously, the world's first religious site. Furthermore, well, first known religious site. Furthermore, there were spearheads discovered. And it also shows you that, yes, Africans have been refining their hunting and warfare techniques for thousands and thousands of years. And I've been saying that all along. But to be fair, I've been saying that on YouTube after this article came out. However, I wasn't aware of it until I think 2011 or so. I don't remember. So anyway, that would also suggest that martial arts, not just religion, came from Africa. But when you look at the locations of these things, right? Stonehenge being in Europe, and Gobekli Tepe being in southeastern Turkey, which is part of the Fertile Crescent, which extends into Africa. In the Smithsonian's article, it said that it would have attracted hunter-gatherers from Africa and the Levant. This is assuming that there were no established boundaries and that these hunter-gatherers could have migrated uncontested, which is quite possible. We do see a whole plethora of different tribes in the Middle East, especially in the ancient world. There also seems to be some evidence of some of the earliest known cultivations of grains. And the claim is that these hunter-gatherer societies were able to domesticate animals and stuff, but before agriculture was really, the main source of food or a major source of food. They were able to make a settlement that involved hundreds of people. The amount of people it would have taken to create such a site. Huge stone blocks. I believe they said limestone. I'll put it in the comments. What's important here is not these details. I'll give you a link to the article for the details. What's important here is the migration pattern of these artifacts. Now, and this archaeological site and the other ones in relation to the other ones. So there's several interesting theories we get here. The most logical is that Africans migrated possibly from South Africa, because when you look at the DNA tests from DNA tribes, it does say that South Africa and African Great Lakes are the biggest match for the Armana pharaohs. So that suggests that we've had migrations, waves of migrations from South Africa to Egypt, or vice versa, but more likely, based on the Python head in Botswana, which is in southern Africa, more likely from that area, rather southeastern Africa, rather not South Africa, to Egypt, through the Fertile Crescent, and on into Turkey. So the most logical theory one can derive from all this is that Africans brought religion, including astrology, to the Middle East, and from there, the Europeans' contact with the Middle East brought the knowledge of astrology in that specific manner to Europe. And before that, certainly the early Europeans must have brought some of this knowledge with them when they migrated out of Africa. So this is the most logical theory. The second theory one can derive is that a religious cult that began in Turkey used its knowledge of astrology and the stars and this kind of pagan knowledge to help them understand the seasons and what seasons were best for growing crops and things of this nature, which isn't that much of a possibility, considering there was a lot of water sources near Turkey. And, you know, there's a reason why it's called the Fertile Crescent. So perhaps, you know, astrology and the weather and the seasons weren't that important. But perhaps they were. But nonetheless, this seems very unlikely that a religious cult would migrate uncontested from the Middle East into Europe and build Stonehenge, and also, well, after migrating all the way to the Nubian desert, 800 kilometers south of Cairo, Egypt, into the Nubian desert, deep in Africa, and build Nabta Player. Okay? So you get that kind of second theory, the cult theory. The third theory, which is probably more likely than the second, is that a group of people migrated to and from southeastern Turkey, Gobekli Tepe, and with their contact with the European, they brought them agriculture and this specific sort of astrology, you know, this religion of the stars or related to the stars. And they also migrated through Egypt before, you know, in pre-dynastic Egypt to Nubia. Okay? And they built, or they gave the idea to the local people, and they helped them build Nabta Playa and teaching them agriculture and their specific way of growing crops, wheats and what have you. Not to mention, you know, cattle cults and whatnot. I really have no problem with any of these three theories, and I'll tell you why. Number one, none of them suggests that religion didn't come from Africa. In fact, the evidence strongly suggests that it did. Number two, the evidence does suggest that warfare and searching for sources of food cause other people to migrate out of Africa. So you have this kind of natural military supremacy, and you have the beginnings of religion in Africa, which speaks well for Africa and not so well for everyone else. Especially if you're a racist, you know, you're Eurocentric with a point to prove, like Schmidt seems to be. Thirdly, it does not even begin to suggest that Africa was built by whites or Semites. Egypt, the pyramids. In fact, it does the opposite. It suggests that Semites migrated to the Nile Delta first and foremost. Some of them probably got further, absolutely. But the majority of them migrated to the Nile Delta. And just like history shows us, southern Egypt or upper Egypt went into the Nile Delta and into the, you know, lower Egypt. Southern Egypt. No, yeah, that's right. They went into the lower Egypt or northern Egypt, and they united the two lands. Okay, which shows us that not only we have religion, the earliest example of religion south of Nubia, all the way in Botswana, but we have another animal deity in Nekhen, where we see the meaning of the Middle Belt and Sub-Saharan Africa and Western Africa, and South Africa, kind of a gathering of black Africans that resulted in the unification of the two lands and the most glorious ancient civilization man has ever known and probably will ever find, because I don't think we'll find anything that is, you know, that can compare to the pyramids. So none of this suggests that black Africans didn't start the first glorious civilization. You know, you can't really compare these civilization and empire. You can't really compare these kind of mediocre civilizations to Egypt, because these civilizations may have discovered several things, certain forms of agriculture and whatnot, but they certainly didn't have a meeting of great minds like you see in Egypt, which was being overseen by the African hierarchy and royal family. the pharaohs, the pharaonic family, if you will, like you do in Egypt. So when you look at this whole thing, you know, first of all, I'm not racist. You know, if I was, I wouldn't even bring this up in my videos. I would just allow people to think that Nabta was the undisputed oldest archaeological site, I believe it's referred to as. But I didn't. I would have, you know, emphasized one theory. I didn't. I presented three. And they're not Afrocentric either. I'm telling you what I honestly believe the evidence shows. Nothing more, nothing less. However, if the Semites, which perhaps is pretty likely, are the ones who brought the, you know, the lion's share of religious knowledge to build the pyramids, who knows? I guess we'll never know about that. We certainly don't know that now because we don't have an accurate date on any of these sites. We don't have an accurate date on Stonehenge, on Nabta or Gobekli Tepe, or even the pyramids. But what we do know is the evidence shows a black African migration out of southern Africa, you know, through Egypt and well into the Middle East. So for all we know, Gobekli Tepe could have been built by black Africans. We don't know. Does it really matter? No. Not to me. To me, what matters most is that Africa was the place where the most glorious civilization was founded, the most glorious empire, and the turning point in human history, which allowed the Romans to use the wheat from Egypt, etc., to civilize Europe, and knowledge from the Near East and, you know, the Middle East to help them come up with different religions that would also help civilize Europe. But Africa plays the biggest role in human civilization, no matter how you slice it. That was the location, and black Africans were absolutely a part of that process in Egypt, no matter how you slice it. And I think it is insane to assume that the Nubians, who are depicted as very typically, you know, sub-Saharan African, South African, what have you, you know, were anything but black. And as long as the DNA and the depictions and the linguistic evidence lines up, certainly Egypt was black, and religion and warfare started in Africa. Therefore, martial arts began in Africa as well, and a martial artist united the two lands from Nekhen up into Lower Egypt or Northern Egypt, conquering the people that were there, which also suggests that there was African military supremacy in the ancient world going back thousands of years.